Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GangstaPriest podcast. As always, I'm your host, Colby Metter, coming at you with episode 6 of the series. Now, today, I've been promising this for weeks, and I'm pretty excited for the show today. This is my first official guest on the show. We would like to welcome in Mr. Nathan Ostrander.
Hello.
So, thanks for stopping by, Nathan.
No problem.
Before we jump right in today, we have switched over. This is the first episode I'm shooting with this new Blue Yeti microphone I had mentioned a few episodes back. So we're in the midst of trying to figure out the audio levels and everything, and so we'll see how it turns out for the episode. But if you notice a change in quality, that's why we're checking out a new microphone. So Nathan, before we kind of get into what we want to talk about today, I want to give you a quick moment just to talk about some of your background in film. I've mentioned on the show before that, I was a film major, and, obviously I love it, or else I wouldn't be talking about it. But I was just interested kind of in how you got into things. I know you and I have kind of connected over that in the past couple years, but I want to give you a few minutes just to share some of your background.
Yeah, I'm no expert, but I've just always enjoyed film. I think from an early age, my dad showed me a lot of movies that, most kids probably never saw, especially, movies that were older, movies that, he watched when he was a kid. And so that kind of got me interested in film at an early age. I dabbled in shooting video and uploading, dumb skits to YouTube as a kid, and never really, took it too seriously. And then I would say in college is when I really started to take film more seriously and try to dissect it and, really try to understand the techniques behind filmmaking, as well as really trying to, when I watch a film, digest it more and not just consume it as entertainment, but really as a piece of art, and trying to, look at, what the filmmaker was trying to do with every scene and how they craft it all together. So, definitely no expert. I don't have any formal education in film, but I'm also a professional videographer, so that does kind of help me, learn a little bit more about the craft and practice my own skills. And hopefully I would love to, get more into filmmaking. I've worked on a short film before, but just kind of starting out, but definitely a big fan of film and really enjoy just watching movies.
Yeah, that was one thing, as you mentioned a couple of years ago when you in college, you kind of started noticing more and more of an interest of it. That was similar to me. My early years is really, I had the same thing. I'd always grown up and kind of had drifted towards starting to discover things that weren't very well known, the big blockbusters of the day. And it was really around college when I really started to invest in it. And so I think one thing I've always appreciated about you is there's obviously all sorts of different people who go into making a movie. And especially with working for WA&D, you've got that mind for editing and for, as we were talking, even setting us up the audio levels and stuff like that. And that stuff is beyond me. That is not my forte. So I always appreciate, talking about cinematography and stuff with you on that, because I think you've got some more insight than perhaps, I am more, than my forte. And also, like I said, I'm happy too that you, just kind of mentioned that this is a personal passion for you, because as I've been trying to drop this the past couple weeks. I was doing a guest spot today. Been trying to encourage people if they'd be interested. And, I've said it multiple times that I'm not looking for people who have professional backgrounds. And if you do, that's awesome. But I'm looking for people who understand the power of film to connect with us, to teach us. And again, as I've said multiple times, but I'm looking to teach people not what to think, but how to think. And so I think today we're going to have a very good conversation about the film that we selected.
Yeah.
And now our process for picking this. So typically when I go to decide what movie I'm going to do for the week, I kind of am kicking around some ideas in my head. Nathan gave me about 4 or 5 different films, and we kind of talked through them. And I'm really glad that we both sort of landed on the same one we wanted to talk about, because out of all of them, I think it has the best. I think it's going to be the most likable for anybody, definitely. Most enjoyable. And then I think there's a lot of good truth to be dug out, and so hopefully we're able to dig through some of that today.
Absolutely. Very excited about this episode.
But so for today's episode, the film that we did select was Jojo Rabbit. Now this is a more recent film, so you probably have at least seen either advertising for it or maybe seen it at the movie store. The film was actually just released. I know it was 2019, and I want to say it was in the back half of the year.
Yeah, I think sometime in the fall.
I think it was up. It was up for Oscars. I know for sure. I think it was up for Best Picture this year. If I recall correctly. But the film's directed by Taika Waititi, and probably I would say most people are familiar with his work in Thor Ragnarok. He's done a lot of stuff prior to that, but I think that was really is going to be the launching point for the rest of his career. So, in talking about Waititi and in looking, or just face value watching the film, what influences of other directors do you think that you saw in the film? Because there's one that immediately came to my mind. I was curious if you maybe had the same reaction to it.
Not immediately. I don't know. This was my first film I've actually seen of his, and I love how. I mean, he's kind of a weird guy, and I kind of love that wrong about him. He's definitely out there. He's. I don't know. Who did you think it reminded you of?
I was thinking of Wes Anderson.
Okay, I definitely can see that.
If you know Wes Anderson, a lot of his movies, and it's funny because I like a lot of Wes Anderson stuff, but I hate his style usually because Anderson is he treats each shot like a painting, and so almost everything in the shot is symmetrical.
Yeah.
From the tones that he uses, he likes to use bright colors. You get these shots. I mean, if you're looking at a character's talking straight on, they're usually right in the center of the shot, and left and right, everything is like even on screen. And I am not an organized person, so sometimes that kind of is hard for me to pick through.
Yeah, I definitely noticed the framing in this film. Every shot was just hand-picked. You could tell he was very involved in the cinematography of this film, because you could just see it in every shot that everything was intentional.
And what's strange to me is, like I said, normally that influence, and again, I would be willing to bet that he would list Wes Anderson because the style felt very heavy.
A deeper film. But, I think he can do both and be a successful director that way.
Yeah, I think if he continues to pick up work, I think you're going to see that he's going to be very successful. A lot of times, it's been a while since we've really had any directors that have really left their stamp. I mean, I know Michael Bay is kind of a punchline joke, but like he does have his own style. Obviously Christopher Nolan's another big name that comes to mind. James Cameron is maybe more modern, I would say. But I think good directors and good artists in general know their style. And if you watch a Scorsese film, the plot is always different, but you can tell it's a Scorsese film.
Absolutely.
I mean, any Kubrick, Tarantino, they always have their specific style. But I think that's what makes them stand above the rest. Is again, most directors that fall by the wayside just have the basics, but they don't really leave their stamp on it. It's like if you watch The American Idol. I mean, a lot of those people can sing good, but what makes you? What makes you unique? And so when someone comes along that changes the game a bit or has kind of a unique taste, which is, like you said, he's an odd guy, but I think a lot of his stuff, the unique spin he gives on it is what's going to give him, if he continues to hone in on that style, I really think you're going to see a lot of good works from him.
I really do, and I think, I wouldn't be surprised to see him win a few Oscars in the next few years, as well as just make a lot of money with the big blockbusters he's doing.
So going back to Jojo Rabbit, like I said, it did come out last year, and as always on the show, I recommend going and checking the film out. This is another one. I believe I rented it on YouTube again, which the standard price for most movies on there is like $4. This one was a little bit more because it's a newer film. But of course, you can Redbox or whatever your method of renting is. But the film has several fairly big name actors in it. Sam Rockwell, who's really, just like Waititi, has really started to take off in his career lately. He had a part in, what's the Dick Cheney film?
Vice.
Yeah, Vice.
I was going to say, I loved his performance.
I think he was in Three Bridges.
Okay.
3 Billboards Over.
Oh, okay. Ebbing, Missouri.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. I'm blanking on the name. But yeah, he's really starting to take on some bigger roles, and I think he's an excellent actor.
Yeah, I agree.
I was surprised. I didn't realize that Scarlett Johansson was in it until she appears in the film. I hadn't really seen much of her in the advertising. And then Waititi himself portrays Hitler, which is probably the most
incredible performance. Yeah.
And then finally, and of course, there's other people in it, but Roman Griffith Davis is the protagonist, Jojo. And I was curious your thoughts on that too. I am not, I want to say I don't dislike children actors, but I know like, what's the big Stranger Things? Like everybody lost their mind. Oh, these kid actors are so great, and I think most child actors don't fully. I mean, you're not an adult, you don't fully comprehend your emotions, and so sometimes it comes across as wooden. But I was curious as to what your thoughts were on his portrayal.
I thought he did an excellent job. I think he's arguably one of the best child actors I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
Like I do agree with the sentiment that oftentimes child actors are not as developed. I mean, obviously they just haven't had enough life experience to really have a full, the full range of emotions. I mean, when you're a kid, like you don't really, I mean, some kids maybe, but like most kids don't really know what true sadness is in most cases because they haven't experienced enough in life. So it's like to see him express the full range of emotions here and really you feel, I don't know, he really sells it. And I think he did a great job. Yeah,
I agree. Just like you said, I was very impressed with it. And he carries most of the film.
Yeah.
And when you're the lead actor, I mean, that's why you're the lead actor. You're the one that's the driving force behind it.
And really unknown before this, right? I mean, I don't know if this was.
Yeah,
his first
I
role,
have never seen him in anything else, unless he's in Stranger Things, because I've never watched it. I'm not a fan, but like I said, I completely agree. I think that he definitely carried his weight. So kudos to him. So to give a quick summary of the plot, and I know sometimes I differ on this, sometimes I give pretty in depth. Today I want to kind of keep it a short synopsis just so we can talk more about some of the things in it. But so the young boy Jojo, he struggles with the feelings of growing up in World War II Germany as he tries to realize his aspiration of being a member of Hitler's youth. But after an unfortunate accident with a hand grenade, Jojo finds himself relocated to daily affairs for the war effort in his hometown. Separated from his dream, with only his imaginary friend Hitler and his mother, Jojo attempts to return to a normal life. But things change for Jojo when he discovers his mother is hiding a Jewish girl in the attic. And that's probably the first half of the film. And then the back half is, again, kind of the resolution of everything. The Russians and the Americans are moving in on the city. And so as time passes, Jojo's got to contend with this girl in his attic who he thinks is the bad guy and can't understand what on earth his mother's doing with her, but also trying to contend with all the daily things that are asked of him for the war effort and trying to piece together, what is right and what is wrong in this sort of war-torn city. And so, as I always say, check the film out. I do want to give a spoiler alert. We're going to talk about some things probably that are going to give away things in the film, but I usually come into this assuming that you've watched it, heading in. So there's your spoiler alert or spoiler warning. I mean, that was a very general overview, so that doesn't give too much of the plot away. But if you haven't seen it, I would recommend checking it out. So go do that, and you can come back and listen to the rest of the episode.
Spoiler alert: the Nazis lose. So if you didn't know that, then sorry.
Yeah, just in case you weren't aware, the Nazis in the Third Reich did not reign supreme, which is very good. I'm glad that didn't happen. Anything else to add to that? As far as I know it was a quick overview, but
I think we'll get into it, I'm sure, through our discussion. But it's a good summary of it.
So today's episode, as I always do, we want to kind of take some of the themes and pick them apart. And so the first thing I think that you get from this is the whole film is a big FU to everything that was the Third Reich.
Yeah.
Waititi said this, I believe. The tagline is something about an ironic anti-hate message or something like that for the movie. But that was my first glance. I don't know if you think the same. But
yeah, I knew right away from the trailer, just like finding a way to make fun of every little thing that the Third Reich did, just to make them look so ridiculous, from their fear of Jews to just the propaganda and like the brainwashing of young children through the Hitler Youth. That's they really do. They use comedy to really push that, how ridiculous the concept of the Third Reich was.
Yeah, the style of it is... There are films like this out there. I think of Charlie Chaplin and The Great Dictator, which was mocking Hitler. And so this certainly has not been... It's not like new and that no one's ever mocked Hitler before. Inglourious Basterds does it a little bit. But it seems to be that there's two, either mock Hitler or, obviously like Saving Private Ryan or Schindler's List. There's a lot more dramatic in tone. There's not really any that kind of have that medium balance. And I kind of found that with this film. While it is, up front comedic in nature, they find these nice little moments of tension and drama in there. And so I think the message that Waititi was trying to get across, that's really when it brings it forth.
Yeah.
But as we said, the main gist of it is comedy. And so I wanted to ask, just in your mind, what were some examples, like the most prevalent examples of this from the film? These moments that, he's trying to take something that, maybe authentically happened, but embellish it and emphasize it in a sense that they make these, the Nazis look like clowns, they look like buffoons. There's a couple that I've got. I want to hear your perspective first.
Well, I think, the overarching thing is obviously with Hitler as his imaginary friend. He's in the entire film, and obviously it's not really Hitler. It's just in his head, but it's just funny to. It's just another way to poke fun at Hitler and make him, not as, I guess, just make him look pathetic in a way, I guess. And I really enjoy it. I thought Taika Waititi's performance as Hitler was phenomenal, and I don't know. It definitely was the comedic relief a lot of times in the film, and which is ironic because it's Hitler.
Uh-huh.
And I just think, I don't know. I'm glad this film exists in 2019, 2020, because a lot of people will probably get upset just hearing that somebody is portraying Hitler in a lighthearted fashion, and obviously missing the point that it's satire. It's making fun of the Nazis. Not glorifying the Nazis, but I'm just glad that this kind of comedy can still exist, and that it can, comedy can be used to convey a message like this. And I really like that.
Yeah, in the opening scene, because I actually wasn't sure at the start. I thought maybe Hitler was actually there. You don't really get it right off the bat until some stuff starts happening. Like, oh, okay, this is Jojo's imagination. But in the opening scene, Jojo's getting his uniform on because he's getting ready to go off to this camp for the Hitler Youth. And he's trying to talk himself up in the mirror, and so he's trying to build up that courage. And all of a sudden, you see actually Hitler in the room, building him up, oh, you're going to be such a great German Nazi, and all this stuff. And
you're such a good Nazi.
You're so confused, and then again you realize it's his imagination, which becomes a really powerful vehicle because you understand that Jojo, who is this young boy, is enamored with Hitler, and he thinks
so
that he
brainwashed
is,
that. He idolizes this evil person, right? But he doesn't know that he's evil. He doesn't think he's evil. He's been told his whole life that he is the glorious leader of the new Germany, and that he's going to save them from all their enemies, whoever that may be. And he even talks about throughout the film how he wishes he was part of Hitler's body, one of his bodyguards. He's like, that's his dream, that's his goal. And so he's hoping to impress Hitler by his courage and his actions.
Well, and you can tell how he feels about him because, again, that opening scene, or then when he actually goes away to the boys' camp, there's a part where, and this is actually where the name of the movie comes from, but there's some older boys who are trying to teach the kids about the importance of killing and, what killing feels like, and do you have the courage to kill? And so they try to get Jojo to kill a rabbit, and he can't do it. He can't bring himself to kill this rabbit, so he runs away. And I don't have the quote in front of me, but the boys basically say oh, little Jojo Rabbit, always running away from everything. And so that kind of becomes his moniker for the rest of the film, and also takes on, as the story progresses, kind of what Waititi was trying to say. But it cuts to Jojo by himself in the woods, and then all of a sudden, here comes yet again Hitler, who's having a conversation with him about courage and, and what to do and killing and yada, yada, yada. And so then Jojo, at the end of this conversation, gets amped up, and so they're doing... throwing stick grenades, teaching the kids how to throw, stick grenades at targets. And so here comes Jojo sprinting through the woods at full speed with Hitler beside him and making these silly poses and stuff. Picks up a hand grenade and chucks it. And, it's almost like Rocky moment, a slow-mo, he's above the world, everything.
Thing.
Yeah. And then he looks down, and the grenade's gone maybe 2 feet from him.
I think it bounced off a tree and landed at his feet. He looked down and he's like, oh shit.
He's like, oh shit. He ends up getting blown up by it. And he survives, but it disfigures him, and that's what leads to him being stuck, kind of working in the office instead of being on the front lines. Right. But again, it's just in that moment you see how much he values the idea of Hitler and what he thinks Hitler is, and so... And he does it in a way that is, I don't want to say pleasing, that's not the word, but obviously if someone told you their imaginary friend was Hitler in today's day and age, they would be like, what the hell is wrong with you? But it's important to show how, as a young kid, there are people that we idolize that we make our heroes, and it's rooted in good things. I think as young boys, we have a sense of adventure. We have a sense of wanting to be courageous, of wanting to be a hero.
You're always looking for someone to look up to.
Yeah. The problem is sometimes when we begin to idolize them, we might overlook their faults. And, as a young kid, you can't really pick through that, but as an adult, and we'll talk about this more in a bit, but this does happen with the adults as well, where they become adults and they still have those idols and they still can't they do turn a blind eye to all those faults. And that's something I think is a bit of a cautionary tale for us, is that, we got to be careful with that.
Yeah.
But the last thing I want to talk here about comedy kind of before I move forward is... And I like that you mentioned this too, because we live in a day and age where comedy should be the last arena for free speech.
Yeah, definitely.
And we're living in a day and age where the PC police are out to get everybody. And if a tweet you had from 5-6 years ago resurfaces, and you get canceled. We're in cancel culture, which I think is terrible. And so, as you mentioned in this specifically, it uses comedy to point out all those flaws of the Third Reich. And so. I think, what does that say to you, especially knowing too that, and I didn't realize this about Waititi, is actually, I don't know if he's fully Jewish, but he has, Jewish ancestry.
Yeah.
But what does that say about the use of comedy in our lives in situations like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think comedy is one of the most powerful art forms, if you will, just because it really opens people up to what you're trying to say, right? If you can use comedy, especially in this way, where there's a purpose behind it. It's not just to make people laugh. It's to open them up to the themes of the film that you're trying to portray. In this case, just pointing all the flaws in the Third Reich and mocking them. So it is a very easy way to get the audience's attention. It's a very effective way, and I think that it's done extremely well in this film. It's not a pure comedy. There are definitely some dramatic and serious moments, but the comedy carries you through the film and keeps you engaged the entire time. It's not constantly dramatic or serious. It definitely has a good balance, I would say, of both.
Yeah, I think comedy can be used as a weapon to belittle and to and this is what they do in the movie. When you have an idea, so again, the Nazis' idea of that we're the best nation and the Jews are below us and they aren't even people, and so the fact that a whole nation started to almost become to believe these things is just downright silly.
Yeah.
But of course it happened, and so I think we use comedy to point that out and show people how much of a fool these people look like, because then if you yourself, are like that and you're seeing this, nobody likes to be made fun of. And nobody likes to feel embarrassed. And so it can go one of two ways. I think when you see this, if you have those feelings yourself, the comedy can sort of eradicate from you by being like, well, I don't want to be on this because I don't want to be a clown.
Yeah, it would make you question your beliefs if you were, someone who does sympathize with the Nazis, someone who, there are white nationalists to this day that wave around the swastika. And so, if you were one of those people and you were watching this film, it would rub you the wrong way, of course, and that's the point. That's a good thing in this case. Yeah.
One thing I want to kind of shift, and we talked about a few of these things already, but I want to kind of shift here and talk about some of the characters. So Captain Klenzendorf, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Klenzendorf maybe, is who Sam Rockwell portrays in the movie. And so you come to learn he ends up being like the director for this Hitler Youth camp that they're putting on and trying to teach the boys, some of these wartime things. He has lost one of his eyes. He's blind in one eye. He was injured, I believe, during a battle. Still a crack shot. That's, in fact, his opening scene's pretty funny because he's shooting off shots and putting all these different poses and stuff. But it's in the character of him, and as we've said, kind of overall, it's a very very different in tone. Where I think most war films prior to this, and even comedic ones, they tend to use a drearier, color palette. Saving Private Ryan is a very muted film.
Oh yeah,
it's night and day difference from this. The dramatic overtones are far more tragic, and the other thing is most Nazis, most Germans. I've talked about this before on the show, but when I did the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly episode, I mentioned how there was kind of that old school thought of the John Wayne Western, the good guy and the bad guy. The good guy wears white, the bad guy wears black. Good guy's clean shaven, bad guy has a mustache. And I think the same thing often happens with war films.
Yeah.
We know what the Germans did was bad, but it's like we need to constantly be reminded of that. And so a lot of times I find that German characters are very one-dimensional.
Of course, yeah.
And what do you think about that with this? I mean, do you think...
Yeah, I really enjoy how, especially with Sam Rockwell's character, you really do feel like, I mean, you like the guy right away. Like he's
kind of charming and endearing in a way, and you can tell he's been wronged by the Third Reich in a way, because he's stuck here. He wants to be on the front lines, but he's been stuck here, running this children's camp essentially. And so he's kind of bitter about it. You see him taking a swig out of his flask every now and then, and he's supposed to be, leading these kids, and so obviously he doesn't want to be there. And so yeah, I think you see a complex character who has who's not just this one-sided, simple villain that's easy to hate. You actually kind of like the guy even though he's a Nazi. And so I think that's really interesting, because I haven't seen a film that does that makes a Nazi likable. So I mean that's kind of crazy about it, but it's also important, I feel like, because the reality is in any war, not everyone, it's easy to look at the decisions that were made by those in charge and associate everyone from that country, or especially anyone in the military, to those decisions and to the actions of maybe a few, or whatever. But not everyone is necessarily on board with that. They kind of have no choice because they were maybe they were drafted or whatever. And war, it's not that simple. And so it's easy to have this mentality that to just paint everyone from that country or on that side as a villain, even though it's really, at the end of the day, they're people too, and they have complex emotions and dreams and aspirations, and I'm sure plenty of the Nazi soldiers didn't want to fight in the war, but they had no choice.
Well, that's what I always find intriguing, and I've said this time and time and time again, but black and white characters might make for a simple tale and a fun tale, but the more challenging ones are the gray characters, and those are people who don't really fit in any of those molds, because that, to me, is more common in real life. If you look at the captain, again, with most Nazi films, you're either on the one side, you hate the Jews and you wish they were dead and Hitler's the best and you're evil, or the other side, you are maybe a poor and destitute German and you don't like the war and you're trying to help Jews and you hide them in your attic, but there's not really any in between. There's not too many portrayals that I can think of. The only one I had written down was Ray Fiennes in Schindler's List, and I don't know why I can't remember the name of the German general that he plays.
Yeah.
But there's a very human quality to him in that, where he's doing these bad things and you see it, but you also see these human moments from him where he's sort of questioning what he's doing, if it's right or wrong. And again, you don't see that very often in war films. And so to see the general in this, or Captain Klenzendorf, one thing I looked up was actually on his uniform. Waititi mentions that he had given him several patches that show this isn't just some bum from the army. I mean, he's done a lot. He's an honorable man. He's sacrificed for things. He saved men. And you see it in the film, and kind of the fondness he has for Jojo a bit. There's a scene that, and again, this is spoiler alert here, but the Gestapo, word starts getting around that there might be a Jew in Jojo's household. And so the Gestapo show up. And another
great scene. Great scene. We can break that down in a minute.
We'll circle back to that. But basically, they come in, and Jojo, of course, is well aware this girl's upstairs, and so he's trying to hide her and get them to leave. And then all of a sudden, this girl, they ask "Is there anybody else home?" And this girl just up and shows herself. And so Jojo's like, "What in the heck are you doing?" And the girl tells him that, she's Jojo's sister. And so they go upstairs and are looking around, and Jojo actually used to have a sister, but she passed away at a very young age. And so this Jewish girl, Ilsa, is trying to pass off that she's his sister. And so they ask her, they say, "Well, where are your papers?" And she starts ruffling through, and she's trying to find them. She does eventually end up finding her birth certificate or papers, whatever they are. And they ask her, they say, "Well, what's your birthday?" And so she has no clue, of course, what this girl's birthday is, but she throws out a guess. And the captain asks for the paper. she passes it off to him. And he looks at it, and there's kind of this. It reminded me a lot of like Alfred Hitchcock, the tension there.
Yeah.
And like, oh my gosh, is this girl going to get caught? And then he hands the papers back, and he says, "You're right. You're free to go." And so when they leave, Jojo comes back to the room, and Ilsa informs him that the date that she gave was not the date on the papers.
Yeah.
And so you learn in that moment that the captain knew she actually was not who she said she was, but he let her go.
Yeah.
And so again, I think that kind of points to, even though he's a part of something that's not good, he does find ways to do good in his heart.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where that gray comes into play.
He's not totally brainwashed to think that all Jews, should die, and because otherwise he would have turned her over.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, he had some compassion there. Whether that's the first time he's done that or now, we don't really know. But we do see a human side to him where he is, compassionate and decides to spare her. And then we also see later in the film. There's a moment where Jojo is kind of round up with a bunch of other German soldiers that were being they were being executed.
Yeah.
And Sam Rockwell's character sees Jojo and basically gets him to leave and saves his life, essentially, because just after Jojo leaves, we hear gunshots, and we assume his character was executed by the Americans. So, another selfless act there to protect Jojo, an innocent kid, and spare his life, despite the fact that Jojo wanted to be, one of the Nazis. He wanted to be just like the captain, but obviously the captain knew what was better for Jojo.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he kind of becomes a de facto father figure almost
Definitely.
to Jojo, because, you learn, and they never really 100% give what happens to him. Jojo's father is missing the entire film. And he supposedly went off to fight in the war, and he was fighting in Italy, but then other characters say he ran away, and then kind of suggest at one point maybe he's dead. So you don't really know what's the deal with his dad. All you know is his dad is not present. And the only one in his life besides the captain who really tries to set him on the right path is Ilsa. Does a bit. I don't think Ilsa's doing it intentionally. I think it's their interactions that are shaping one another.
Yeah, just naturally.
But more importantly, it's his mother, who's played by Scarlett Johansson. And she, to me, is, and I want to kind of transition here. Sorry, we had an update pop up on the old laptop. But I do want to kind of transition here into talking about the theme of nationalism in the movie. And as I do on the podcast here, trying to apply it to our own lives, but I see in her someone who, again, she recognizes what's going on is wrong. And she didn't ask for any of this, but being a citizen of that city in Germany, she has to make decisions that are in front of her of what to do. And so throughout the film, you see her struggling with trying to, first of all, being basically a single mother and raise a boy, and then also help this girl in the attic, on top of trying to keep things secret. And then you find out as the film progresses that she's actually working for the anti-war, effort. She goes out, she's secretly kind of passing messages and propaganda. All the while also trying to deal with her son. And not just raise his spirits, but also try to teach him. She can't blatantly come out and say, you can't be a Nazi, they're wrong, because she knows that happens, she's probably going to get executed.
Yeah.
But on the same token, and she has this great scene with Ilsa, they're sitting in this little, attic closet that she's hiding Ilsa in. And she says to her, I know my boy's in there somewhere. I know somewhere in there he's just a little boy.
Yeah. The
and
good
again,
is still in him.
Kind of what we said earlier, boys are rough and wild, and they have this sense of adventure. And, you can think of junior high boys especially. They get in a lot of trouble, but it's just boys being boys.
Right.
It's not anything. They're not out genuinely in their hearts trying to do evil things. The problem is, though, if you don't have that guiding voice, then as you get older, it can lead to people being, good or bad. And so I think it speaks to someone in his life who's trying to fight for that good and direct Jojo and show him that, again, look, some of these things are good, but, the whole Nazi thing, this adoration of Hitler, that's not the greatest thing to aspire to be.
I think, you can definitely sense in his mother that, I would say she doesn't hate Germany. She loves her country, but she just hates the Nazis. She hates what Germany has become. And you can kind of get a sense for that because, she's, I think they're walking along some, country road with his mom and Jojo. And she just talks about how she just wants the war to be over, and she just wants to enjoy the beautiful things in life, and she talks about dancing and how dancing represents freedom and all this, and I mean, she just doesn't endorse the violence and the hatred that comes from the Third Reich, but she doesn't hate her country necessarily. She just hates the state it's in right now, and she obviously is fighting for a free Germany, a Germany that is not committing atrocities and singling out one race of people, as you can as the fact that she's harboring a Jew and keeping that Jews hidden and safe from the Nazis. You can tell obviously she's not on board with what they're trying to do.
There's a really stark change of emotion that comes with her, and I want to circle back to that. But before you do, I want to talk just a little bit more kind of on this theme of nationalism, because I remember one of the critics was talking about this movie and saying, lampooning Hitler and making fun of her, it's beating a dead horse. I mean, it's been done so many times before. What are you doing this new or unique? But while it is, again, as we've said, a comedic in nature, I think the focus, again, in showing that middle area of German citizens, like, again, with his mother, who is struggling between loving her country, but also not really liking some of the direction that they're going in. And so I think you've seen this throughout history and today in our day and age. And, I want to kind of talk with you a bit about where is that line of nationalism, where you breach that line of being proud and it shifts over into jingoism, I think is a term for just like an obsession with your culture. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. That's what I want to talk about, where that line is, or even if it should be there at all, if nationalism is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean,
in today's day and age, I think, so in the United States, we don't really call it nationalism, we call it patriotism, right?
Yeah.
There's kind of the whole, Europeans kind of find that laughable because they obviously, they're not as patriotic. They're not, they don't have that sense of nationalism because they saw what it did to Europe, particularly because of Germany. And so that kind of sense of nationalism isn't quite present in a lot of European countries, but certainly in the United States, we are very proud of what we've done as a country, and rightfully so. We've done a lot of good things in the world, and we are a very, I think, a force for good for the most part. But I think, just like with anything, no one's perfect, and the United States certainly isn't perfect, and we've done some things that we shouldn't be proud of. And so I think a good sense of, when it comes to nationalism, you can't just be 100% gung-ho for whatever your country decides to do. You have to be an individual who, sorts everything, filters everything through your beliefs and your convictions, and decide what is right or wrong. And sometimes you'll have to admit that what your country is doing is not right. And I feel like obviously for the most of the German people during World War II, that they either didn't have the courage to stand up or didn't see it as wrong, and then they were basically brainwashed by all the propaganda that they were fed by the Nazis. And that's a big thing that you have to be careful of. It's easy to to always think that you're in the right and that your country can't do any wrong because that's what you've been told your whole life, but that's not always true.
Yeah, I think there, for me, and again, talking about the pendulum kind of shifting, the two sides I see here is the one is the far extreme nationalist, which is where you're going into the pride is so strong that our country is better than anyone else, that everyone else is wrong, that we don't have any flaws. But the flip side of that is a sense of almost anger at your nation or disgust with your nation. And I think this connects very well because that's what I think is almost the leading, which is sad to me. You don't see this in the older generation. I think the older generation still has that patriotism. Mm-hmm. And I think that's because they lived through a lot of things like World War II and the Great Depression and, the Korean War and kind of saw, and the Vietnam War, and so saw a lot of things that, bad things in the world, but how America was collectively, the land of hope and the land of the free, right. and was, even though everything else was bad, still had the right values and ideas in mind.
Right.
But you see a lot of times nowadays, and I see this with people our age, people in their 20s, people in their 30s, and I don't know if it's the college culture that's going on or what, but so many people are just, they're angry at the nation, and they think that, you know, America is not the greatest, and America has this problem and that problem. And I like I said, I think the balance lies in between those somewhere, because we certainly don't get it right. And if you go back in our history, you know that there's plenty of things that we've done that have not been good, right things. But that being said, no country has a perfect record book. And I think even though we've done a lot of wrong, America also has done a lot of right. Yeah. And so for me, you know, to be a citizen of a country, and just like the Germans in this film, it's where you were born, it's where your culture, your history comes from. It's, you know the people, you know the food, you know the music. And so I've always enjoyed, like, for example, if you watch like the FIFA World Cup, you know, if anybody who's ever taken a few moments to watch that, I love watching these countries belt their national anthem with such pride, because there's this sense of that, again, amidst the right and the wrong, at the end of the day, I'm still very happy and proud to be an American for everything that we fought for, where we're at. And it doesn't mean that we're where we need to be, but it's a sense of pride. And we were talking about this earlier today, but, you know, when you're a kid and you think, you know, my mom, it's Mother's Day, my mom's the best mom out there. Right. You know, there's not really any metric to compare, you know, what's better, you know, one way or what's better another way. But in your heart, your mom is your best. Your mom is the best because she's your mom, and she's giving you things. And so there's a sense of pride, and that's how I feel. You know, with America, it's like I am proud to be this country. And again, we've got problems we got to work on, but I still take faith and hope in my people. I get frustrated when we have this sort of doom and gloom mentality, because it's almost like people go around and try to browbeat you and make you feel ashamed for being an American. And they're so apologetic about everything, and they act as if people are clueless to the bad things that we've done, or that other countries have a perfect record. Yeah. And when you look at it, again, life is gray. Everyone's done terrible things, and it's a matter of overcoming those that I think is what's important, not focusing on all the bad. Not forgetting it, but not focusing on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think no one can really argue. I think the United States has done more good in this world than any other country has, just in general. Like, I mean, you know, we've stood up for the little guy more times than anybody else, I feel like. And that's not always the case for a lot of the other world powers. They've always colonized and ruled over the small guy, you know, dominated over the little guy. So that's not really what we do. I mean, we have, I'm not going to say we've done it perfectly, but we've, you know, for the most part, we've always stood up for the little guy. And so, yeah, I think it's important to have a good balance, though, like you said, and to always think that anything we do is going to be good is not a, you know, you have to measure everything we do with your own convictions and what you believe is right or wrong, and not just simply follow the herd. But definitely, I feel like there is a growing sense of, I don't know what the right word would be, but, you know, people who honestly despise their own country. And I don't think that's right either. I think there's definitely a middle ground.
I think there's something else, too, in there, and I want to kind of start to bring things to a close here, but there's the last kind of big thought that I want to talk through. But not just with your own country, it goes to other countries too. You know, a lot of times, like in today's day and age, you know, terrorism is one of the things out there that, of course, nobody likes. Right. And we automatically assume that anybody from Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran is a terrorist. And that's not to say either that we need to have an oblivious mindset and think, well, everybody in there is good. It's only a few people who are bad. Again, there's some kind of defining line in there, and I don't know what that is. Right. But I think we must be cautious, too, of being so quick to, you know, judge everyone. Because, again, a film like this, you know, the minute you hear someone was a Nazi, and you just automatically think they were the worst person ever. Or when you watch a film about slavery, you know, you think everybody who was in the South during that time period was just this terrible, awful person. Right. And a lot of times people were born into this. And even when you know in your heart maybe that something's wrong, or as you see, and this is what I love about this with the captain, with Jojo, you don't just wake up the next day and understand, oh, this is bad and evil. Especially when you're born in that environment. Sometimes it takes things happening to change your mindset. And so there's the far extreme people who are bad. There's the far extreme people who maybe are on the side of good. But the majority of us are in that middle. And so what I want to kind of transition into here is talking about how you can make a difference in that on a day-to-day basis, because I think the best example you see it in, again, is his mother. I know a lot of times on the show I talk about, try to take a verse of scripture and apply it to what we're talking about, but when I was driving down here today to shoot, I got to thinking about, Christ, and I don't want to get too far into this because I just don't want this to turn political, but, everything that's going on right now with the riots over the death of the African-American man who was, killed by the cops, or potentially killed by the cops. There's a lot that's going on there. And again, I'm not trying to take sides or talk about it because I just don't want to do that. I want to stay out of politics. But, that's all been running around my mind. And so I ask myself, you're seeing all these riots and stuff, and you're seeing everybody on Facebook posting about everything, and they think their opinion's the best. And so I try to ask myself, how would Christ act in this situation? And one of the things that came to mind was, he says, when you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And there's more to that, but I kind of snowballed into this because in your heart, what you think is what's right or what you think is wrong, if you want to share that with other people, maybe point them to the right direction. I don't know if standing on the mountaintop and screaming at everybody and yelling at everybody and telling them and trying to shame them is the best way to do that. Or assuming that everyone you meet who disagrees with you is a bad person. Mm-hmm. I think the way you change hearts is through one-on-one encounters, through these small moments. And again, I think you see it in a character like his mother.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say that. Yeah, like you see how patient she is with Jojo. Like obviously Jojo is very, I would say, brainwashed towards the Nazis, right? But she, obviously she loves her own son. And through that love, you can see how patient she is, and she's constantly trying to show him compassion and point him towards the beauty in life. And really, I feel like try to save the last bit of innocence of youth that's left in him, because a lot of that's being eroded away. I think that's a big thing I've picked up from the film is you see all these kids who are being forced into battle, especially at the end of the film, and it's like. I think the innocence of youth and how, Jojo doesn't even know much about life, and yet he's saying all these things about fighting for Germany and doing all these terrible things, yet he doesn't even know much about life to begin with. And so, his mother is clinging on to that and trying to save that last bit of the kid and her son, and I think that's that's definitely a big theme I see.
I always think of the phrase, everybody talks, nobody walks. When you truly have those ideals that you think are right, then I think you got to ask yourself, if you've got nothing that you're willing to die for, then I think you really need to re-examine your life. But I think the way you watch and what you do it, and again, as Christ would say, when you give, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. It's not our job to go out. We don't. You see us all the time on YouTube. People do these videos where it's like, oh, I'm giving $20 to a homeless stranger. I'm such a good person. Right? The whole point of you doing that is not to get the praise. It's for you to do it because it's simply right. Mm-hmm. And so what I love about his mom is she believes what's happening is wrong and she knows what's right. But she doesn't go out again. You don't see her on the street tops yelling at everybody and telling everybody to change their mind. She does it in subtle ways. She goes and passes out the propaganda. I'm sure and her connections with Jojo and trying to lean him towards good. And the sad part, and I mentioned this earlier circling back to this, but there's a very stark scene where Jojo, and I can't remember what happens, but he's walking through the courtyard of the town. And in an earlier scene with his mother, they had looked over and there was about 10 people hanging in the public square, dead, just hanging there, these dead, lifeless bodies of people who stood against the Third Reich. And it comes back to that scene later. Jojo's walking down the street by himself.
He's following a butterfly. He sees a butterfly.
Yeah. And
he's following the butterfly, and then he bumps into the legs of someone hanging,
one of the bodies.
And he looks up.
And the reason why this is such excellent cinematography and editing of the scene is it doesn't even show her face.
Right.
There's an earlier moment where you see these shoes that his mother always wears, and there's kind of this theme like Jojo can't tie his shoes. There's like several scenes where that goes back and forth with that, but he bumps in these legs and he looks up and he notices that it's his mom's shoes, and there's like that pause where he's like, "Oh God, please don't let this be my mother," and then he looks up and sees it is in fact her, and I mean it just the emotion is just taken out of the room, and it's such a powerful moment. But again, I think it speaks to the fact that she wasn't a clueless woman. She knew full and well if she was ever to get caught with what she was doing, she would lose her life. But in the face of that, continued to do what is right. And again, wasn't out bombastically telling everybody what's right and what's wrong, but simply lived it on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's, if any of us want to make a difference or whatever it is, I mean, again, I'm not trying to take sides here. I know the big issue right now is, police brutality and systemic racism, a lot of these things. Whatever side of the coin you're on, if you really want to make a difference, I don't think you're going to do it going out and putting stuff on Facebook or screaming at people, or looting and rioting or trying to shame people. Right. I think it's going to happen through these one-on-one encounters. And again, your motivation, if you're doing it without recognition and you don't really care and you do it because it's right and you do it daily, that to me is what Christ wants us to do. If you're going out and expecting praise and affirmation for everything and being on the right side of history, then I question whether or not your response is legitimately genuine or if you're doing it, just for selfish purposes, if that makes sense. Sorry, I was taking a drink there. We got probably about 10 minutes left here. And so if there's anything that you specifically want to talk about, I'd definitely like to take some time.
I mean, I think this... let's go back to the scene with the Gestapo. We talked about how that's a very comedic scene, and I really enjoyed it. And I think, so for context, Jojo's at home and he hears a knock on the door, and he opens the door, and it's I don't know if you know who Stephen Merchant is. He's just this really tall, lanky kind of guy, and he plays the head of this Gestapo group of Gestapo agents. And they want to search the house and see if there's any evidence of what his mom's been up to, and if there's if she's in fact hiding a Jew. And they come in, and Jojo greets every single one of them. I don't know, there's like probably 6 or 7 of them. Every single one of them every time. And then the captain comes with one of his men as well, and they also have to Heil Hitler to every single one of them. And it's this really long, drawn-out scene, and it just shows I feel like it just shows the comedic, how ridiculous, their dedication to these Nazi ways of having to Heil Hitler every time they greet one another. It just shows how ridiculous it is because they have to do it so much every time they introduce somebody.
Someone had some quote on it, and it might have been Waititi, but he said, he imagined that these were just like old German businessmen who had never really had anything interesting they've done in their life, and then like all of a sudden they're given this power to go and invade homes, and they're the ones making the decisions, and so they're very full of themselves. And because he says something, the captain's like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Well, we were Heil Hitlering the boy, and then we were Heil Hitlering you, and of course Heil Hitlering your comrade, and then just searching the room." Yeah. But this just blind enthusiasm towards their system. When again, no one questions, and I'm sure someone in that group is probably like, "This is idiotic that we're doing this." But no one has the courage to step up and say it because it's that group mentality. Again, it's the minute that you speak against something, you're ousted. And so it takes a lot of courage to do that. Just like, again, I think his mother, and then even Jojo and Ilsa, the courage it takes to continue to learn about her. And I think that the way he learns about the Jews through her, and they come to kind of have this growing admiration for one another. I want to wrap here. I wanted to just share, if you have a couple moments here to share what we were talking about before we started, but kind of been talking about this theme of nationalism again, just to wrap things up and applying it to our own lives. Again, there's two sides of the pendulum, and I honestly I don't know where the middle ground lies. Again, with everything that's been going on this week, it got me thinking about. So Nathan and I have been friends for maybe 7th grade, if not earlier.
Yeah, that's it.
I moved to the school district in 3rd grade, so I think we knew one another. But probably 7th grade when we started actually hanging out. We've been friends ever since. But Nathan, if you don't know him, comes from Jewish Japanese.
Things about myself I didn't know.
I don't know. I've never met a Japanese Jew, so that would be interesting.
Possible, I guess.
No, he comes from a Japanese background, and I don't look at you and think, my Japanese friend Nathan. We joke about you being Japanese, but it's never been like, you're just Nathan to me. You're a person.
Yeah.
And I don't see in that. And so, but again, I don't know if nowadays you see people who it's like they want to like whitewash everything and just be like, well, there's no borders, there's no nationalities. We can't look at people that. And I think there's harm in that too because, you do come from a rich culture and, there's a lot of people who, added these unique things to the world. And I think to just write that off is almost disrespectful in a sense.
Yeah. So like, yeah, I guess from my perspective, being Japanese, so I guess for some context, obviously, if you don't know your history that well, Japan was an ally of Nazi Germany during the war. And, Japan in many ways, similar to how Germany was in Europe, did the same thing in Asia. I mean, they invaded Korea, China, Vietnam, most of Asia was occupied by Japan at the height of the war. And, even to this day, I feel like Japan has this kind of like superiority complex in Asia where they feel like they're superior to Korea or China, even to this day, economically, culturally, whatever. So yeah, there is this kind of, obviously we have a very deep culture, a very rich history, and that's something to be celebrated. So it's trying to find a balance between pride in your country, pride in your culture and history, and but also there's almost too much of it in Japan, I feel like at times, and this sense of superiority when it comes to the other countries in Asia especially, because Japan has always kind of been the economic and most powerful military in the world, in that part of the world. And so they have built up this mindset over at least the last probably 100 years. And so I think it's important to have this cautious sense of national pride, not blindly celebrating everything your country has done, but acknowledging the wrong, but also celebrating what's right and celebrating the good that your country has done as well. So I think, very similar to, I think that's a similar perspective to if you were of German ancestry, if you were from Germany, you don't necessarily have to be ashamed of where you're from, but, just recognize that, not everything your country has done is great, but also that you've, done some good things in the world as well, and being proud of where you're from is never a bad thing as long as you keep it in check. And
I think, too, just having a healthy dose of self-criticism. I mean, so I've done stand-up before, and I often open with self-deprecating jokes. If you can laugh at yourself, then the audience is going to start laughing with you. And so I think one thing you see today, again, with people just trying to whitewash stuff, it's like we can't joke about stuff. Right. I think stereotypes exist for a reason. Yeah. That doesn't mean they're true. I don't think that every person, that I've ever met falls under those stereotypes. But, if we can step back and laugh at them, the one that came to mind when I was thinking, I know you've seen this, but it's one of the early South Park episodes when it's like the dodgeball episode when the cows are like going around and they end up playing for the state championship. And then they're supposed to go to China to play the Chinese dodgeball team. And so there's this little thing, and Matt Parker and Trey Stone, I might have their names flipped on that, I don't remember, but they're brilliant in what they do. And so there's a scene where the two Chinese commentators are sitting up there and they're talking about the game, and so they're trying to make fun of Americans. Because, like American people, we always, squint our eyes. Right? So they do the opposite. They open their eyes wide, and he's like, you want to hear my impersonation of American? He's like, yes, give it to me. He's like, hello there. I have a credit card. Please put it on my credit card. And so, again, like you can sit back and be like, scoff at that and be like, that's not true. But there's some truth to it, and it makes it funny. And again, it doesn't have to be true of you. And you don't have to think of that of everybody. You could just, laugh at it and go on your way and think, whatever you think is right in the world and what is right to pursue. You can do it in a way that is not, being this proud asshole to everybody else. Like, well, if you don't agree with me, because then you're almost doing the same thing as the Nazis. Yeah. Like the thing that you don't want to become, and like I don't, I've never wanted to kill people. That's right, but this egotistical mindset of my way is best. You're becoming the very thing you don't like. Right. And so I just want to encourage people, again, know yourself, know what you stand for, but do it in ways that are quieter. Mm-hmm. And if someone doesn't immediately adhere to your expectations, be patient with them. if they don't agree with me and they're not on the right side of history, then they're gone. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I see. Yeah.
I felt like I was going on a tangent there, but well, final two things here before we wrap up. Every time, again, Nathan's my first guest, so thank you so much for coming on the show today, Nathan.
Me, definitely.
It was nice being able to talk to someone else for once and not just myself for an hour. But there's two kind of quick things I wanted to ask. So first, just face value take, rating the film. What would you give as a rating? And then while you're thinking about that, the second one I want you to think about is this is one of the best examples of a kind of Nazi World War II war films that I can think of. But I want to know what you think is one of the worst. Because I have an opinion on that. I think it's going to be a hot take, but
The worst
World War II movie you've seen that you think is just awful, a terrible film. But yeah, rating. Myself, okay. I would probably rate this between a 7.5 and 7.8.
Yeah, I'm really generous with my ratings.
I know you are.
I give out a lot of 8s. I think I would probably give this an 8.
We're close to that though. That's
yeah.
fair.
I mean, I really love this film. I love comedy, but I also love. I'm a big history buff too, and so I enjoy a good war film. And I think this is the best of both worlds. I really do enjoy it. Yeah, man, I don't know. 8, honestly, maybe 9. It just depends how I'm feeling.
Okay, 9 I think would be too high. 8 I agree with. I think we're close enough
8.
there.
8's good.
The reason why I reserve 9s and 10s for things that it's just so unlike anything I've ever seen before. And this is right on the cusp.
I agree. It's like
cinematography's great, the acting's great, the music's great, so many of the moments are great.
It's an almost perfect film.
It's close to perfect. It's got a few flaws in it.
Definitely, yeah.
But it's pretty close. So yeah, I think at least in my assessment,
I would agree.
We're pretty close. So
I would agree. Yeah.
That's fair. Right now the other one, like I said, I've got a hot take on this, and maybe you don't have one, but if you do, if something comes to mind.
Well, okay, I would say probably. So my least favorite, or in my opinion, the worst World War II movie. The only one that comes to mind, and I wouldn't even say it's that bad of a movie. It's just not great. I would say Midway. I don't know if you saw that. It came out last year. It was an enjoyable popcorn film kind of movie, but it wasn't very deep. It was a very America kicking ass. Kind of like it felt like a Michael Bay movie. Honestly, probably like the movie Pearl Harbor. But it was an action movie. It wasn't really. I wouldn't even call it a war movie, except it is. But it felt more of like a summer blockbuster action film than it did. You could cast Bruce Willis or somebody like that in one of the starring roles or something. You know what I mean? It was that kind of film almost, even though it's a war film. There's not a lot of depth there. It's there's not a lot of complexity to these characters, and not a lot of complexity to the story. And obviously, it's a historical drama, so they're trying to stay true to what happened. But it paints a pretty one-sided view of things, and obviously America was. I would agree that America was the good guy in the war, obviously, but it's just a little over the top. Yep. the way they portray it.
Well, that's why I asked, because one thing I'm constantly trying to remind people on here is, and that's not to say that every film has a place for something, I think, and the fact that someone was willing to undertake doing something and to try and put something creative, I think there's something to be said of that. But we do have to be critical of things, and it's things like that are kind of more face value. I don't know if it really challenges us as much, like something like this, which definitely is why I would give it a higher rating.
Yeah, definitely would not challenge you.
Mine, and like I said, I feel like it's probably going to be a hot take, but
okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen The Boy in the Striped Pajamas?
I don't think I have.
I think it's one of the worst films. And I remember we watched some of it in one of my film classes. I know several people who think, because it's designed in a way to pull at your heartstrings. The story is about, if I remember, it's been years since I've seen it. I think I've only seen it once because I was like, why are people fawning over this? Basically, this boy, he's a German boy, and he's playing one day, and he ends up, there's a concentration camp that gets set up, and it's near his hometown, and so he's kind of confused as to what's going on. And so he's going to the fence, and he meets another boy that's same age as him, and so they connect. And at some point in the film, they change clothes for some reason, and then the boy ends up getting like caught, and they think that he's a Jew, and so then he's brought into the camp, and he ends up getting killed. And so,
jeez,
like that's like at face value, you're like, oh my gosh, that's so sad. But like I watch it, and I'm like, how stupid could this kid be? Like, are you that clueless? You know, kids don't understand emotions that well, but they're not that dumb.
That's crazy. What? I guess I have to watch it to give my take on that. I don't know.
That's why just in comparison to this film and look at it from a kid's perspective, I think this is a well more rounded and better acted portrayal than, again, well, let's just the Nazis are bad, you know, and the Jews were the sad people, so let's have them trade places and then he'll die. That'll make everyone cry.
So, all right, so then let's do the opposite of that. I guess what is your favorite World War II movie, or maybe like top 5 if you want. I don't know if you have 5, but
you don't have to necessarily put them in order. I guess just what is your favorite? Just one.
I would say the most realistic portrayal, I think, is Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I remember watching it when I was in junior high. It was a big buzz, and I just have never seen anything that's really been close to the portrayal of it. A lot of soldiers said that it felt very real. Best one, I guess, on World War II, because I was going to say there's one called Paths of Glory, but I think that was World War I.
Yeah,
it's an older Kirk Douglas film. I would probably go with Schindler's List.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite.
Yeah.
They're both good.
They pull at your heartstrings, but they do it in a way that's, again, realistic and believable and gray, and not just this sappy, like, we all know the story. No one is clueless, like, oh, you know, who are the Jews? What happened to them?
I think Schindler's List is a perfect example, because Oskar Schindler isn't he a member of the Nazi Party?
Yeah.
So it's like, he is already sort of a bad guy to begin with, but you see him change through the film, and at the end he breaks down when they bring the car out, and he's like, what does he say? Like, I could have saved like 10 more or something with that money. It's like, that's such a powerful moment. That stuck with me. I think I've only seen the film once, but that scene really sticks with me because it's so powerful.
Well, and again, it's a good example of the slow burn, and what we were talking about earlier, where humans don't just change overnight.
Yeah.
When he starts in that film, he's not about the Jews. He doesn't. I don't even think he cares about the war.
Yeah.
He's just kind of averse to all of it. He doesn't really care about any of it.
He's
apathetic. I mean.
Yeah.
And all he cares about is making money, and he sees an opportunity. If he helps some people, great. But I'm kind of about me. And it's through the course of the film as you start to see some of these things. Yeah. That's when it kind of starts to change his heart. And I don't know. Again, I think that's more realistic of humans.
Yeah.
Again, we can't expect people to just flip a switch overnight. If you really want to set someone a path of good, it's continuous. It's continuous love, and just letting things happen to them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
I think that's probably my favorite. But Jojo is up there.
Yeah,
it is definitely up there.
Yeah. Again, if you listen today. I mean, I think you gathered from us talking about it that we've greatly enjoyed it. But
if you want to watch a World War II movie that's not as depressing, this is it.
This is definitely it. It's very lighthearted. It's serious at times and does have a lot of emotion. But you will end the movie smiling, and that's a good thing.
You're gonna laugh out loud too. I mean, there's about 3 moments
to laugh.
I laughed
It's okay
out
to
loud.
laugh. I was in the theater watching it, and everyone laughed. I mean, I kind of led the way. I made sure to laugh, and people laughed with me. And it's okay to laugh at this movie.
Yeah,
it's very enjoyable, and it's a good movie.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's about our time for today. So again, I want to thank you, Nathan, for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure down the road we'll have you back on in the future.
Yeah.
If you are someone who's listening, and I've been trying to pull back from doing, pushing the whole guest thing in the past few episodes, but as this was our first one, I believe our next one's going to be with Dylan Reedy coming up, and I'm going to try and do this like every 2 weeks. Yeah. I think is going to be my kind of my schedule for the guest episodes. I mean, as you know, I'm trying to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday releases for the podcast itself. But if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can reach out to me on Facebook, shoot me a text, leave a comment below. And leave a comment below on our topic today. We'd love to hear from you, get some good discussion, good feedback. As always, as I always say, I just want to learn. I want people to learn how to think, not what to think, but how to think. And so I hope that today we were able to provide some insight and give you some good things to think about. But that is going to do it for us today. And so until next time, this is Colby Metter and the GangstaPriest podcast, and we'll see you then.